This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and on this week's show we have a new edition of the Arnold Report with our Susquehanna Valley Center's Chairman, Ed Arnold. Ed, welcome back to the show.
Good to see you, Charlie.
Well, as our viewers know from your past appearances, you are also the former owner and CEO, president of Arnold Trucking and of New Penn Trucking, one of the largest and best trucking companies in the country at one time. Of course, you sold that, and now there's some new things that have been happening in that industry, and we have some questions for you about that very subject. One of our viewers has written to us to ask you, as the former owner of one of the country's largest trucking companies, I would appreciate your insight into what happened recently to Yellow Freight. Why did they not succeed at a time when so much trucking is needed, Ed?
It's very simple. Terrible management. I don't care what you have as a product. If you don't properly administer it, you're going to fail. I mean, the fact is, New Penn years ago was sold to Roadway. Not one person lost their job. Why? Because we were 3 times more profitable than any of the major trucking companies. So they left us alone and said, just keep making money. Unfortunately, a couple years later, Yellow, with their financial manipulation, they bought Roadway. And immediately they started to try to change things at New Penn. Here's a company that owns 1/10 the profit margins of New Penn, yet they decided, gee, your 20-year history must be fudged. It was ridiculous. That's their incompetence, and they don't understand the trucking industry.
Okay. Well, a second question on this, and there will be one more, is considering the Yellow Freight news, how do you view the future of the trucking industry in America?
It's thriving. If you were to have invested in the major public LTL companies, or for that matter, even some of the truckload, but specifically LTL companies.
What is an LTL?
Less truckload, which is what Yellow was. That, and therefore, if you would have bought, and even another union company, I could say the union was part of the reason for the failure of Yellow, but Arkansas Best is also a totally union company. One of 500 that's left from the 70s. They all the rest have gone. They're all non-union now. But Arkansas Best, if you'd have bought their stock 10 years ago, it would have tripled in that time, as would have Old Dominion and other successful LTL carriers. So the LTL industry is fine and healthy and growing.
Good. The last question that we have about trucking that the Yellow Freight situation maybe has spurred among our viewers is, Mr. Arnold, do you think that the nation's trucking fleets can all transition, can all move to electric trucks in the near future?
No, basically. Basically, trucking, you haul, and a lot of your commodities are heavy, so weight is an item. Also, distance is an item if you're talking about long-haul trucking. So obviously batteries, which are very heavy and therefore take time to charge and so on, the whole, even the concentration, if you were to take, you have a terminal which has hundreds of trucks and they operate during the day and they charge at night, it would be a disaster to the grid. So the practicality, could some limited trucks like the UPS trucks and so on possibly be used electric because they're smaller and weight isn't as big a factor, but overall the cars will be the major use. Trucks will be far down the road.
Okay. Well, another viewer has a different type of question for you, and this viewer wants to know, how can homeowner association fees be controlled in the future? My homeowner association fees just seem to skyrocket every year, regardless how much my neighbors and I protest.
Well, I guess this term protest, I assume, and I must admit I've never been part of one of these associations, but basically they're a democratic process. The homeowners elect the board. The board, if it's a large enough operation, elects a manager and tells him what to do. So if you don't like what the board does, it's a democratic process. You put new board members in and change what you're spending your money on. So you control the expenses. So I'm a little, all I can say is, if you don't like the way the board's being run, get a new board, and they'll in turn get a new manager and a new mission.
So you got to get involved, and some people, I guess, don't get involved until the prices rise and rise and rise.
That's correct.
And
yes.
maybe that motivates them.
Now, in the case of a timeshare, you're trapped because a corporation controls it. It's not a democratic process. And you're stuck with the increases. But in the case of homeowners, you shouldn't be.
Okay. All right, switching gears here. What is your opinion, Mr. Arnold, of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce piggybacking with the Clinton Global Initiative and stating how much they're looking forward to rebuilding Ukraine? I never thought of this organization before as a vulture or a buzzard.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused at this. I must admit, I understand it was mentioned in some news outlets that there is a coordination. Very frankly, the U.S. Chamber is a representative of big business, not business overall in America, big business. And big business is international, and they really don't care about what's good for only for themselves and their profit bottom. The Clinton, or obviously foundation, is only cares about the Clintons and the power it can control, and basically it's all about power.
Well, they have been completely unheard from recently until now, just the other week when they thought, oh, rebuilding Ukraine, there's an opportunity.
Well, again, there's an opportunity to make a lot of money and have a lot of power and control. It's interesting how one of the big things they were involved with was Haiti. Supposedly, according to what I've found out, they've had $2 billion plus money put into the Clinton Foundation while the Clintons were in power. This was all it was a method to buy favors from the government. And so basically, I could find nothing on what exactly has the Clinton Foundation really put money into. It's only how they got money in. So basically, at this point, I can't really comment other than to say you're taking two, as you put it, vultures, and for their own self-interest would look to do this, not for the good of anybody else.
Okay. Hitting central Pennsylvania, is Rite Aid Corporation going to declare bankruptcy or go out of business? How is this possible considering the markup on many drugs and the fact that our society uses more medicine than ever before? Why did Rite Aid move its headquarters from Camp Hill to Philadelphia? Did this corporate move have anything to do with their recent financial problems?
Basically, again, just like in Yellow's case, terrible management. I understand that they haven't had a president for quite a while now because the president finally resigned and they haven't even replaced him. But one of the things, the reason why they're filing for bankruptcy, and they are going to as I understand it, is because they sold a lot of private information to Google and other people, and now they're being sued by the fact that they obviously did something that was improper. So this is a major lawsuit, so to get out of the financial burden of that lawsuit, you file for bankruptcy. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll cease to exist. They'll just recycle themselves. I don't know, but also one of their problems is, I assume, and I don't know this is a fact, their theft rate in their stores is way higher than the industry, probably because they have more stores located in big cities, where there's, as we well know, there's a disaster with stealing. So basically, between poor management, between location of their stores, and between lawsuits, they're in terrible shape.
Okay. The next viewer wants to know, what is our, and here's a little bit of editorial comment by the viewer, what is our esteemed state government doing to control China's investment in Pennsylvania, especially Pennsylvania farmland? How much agricultural land has China bought so far in Pennsylvania, and is there a plan to buy it back into American or at least non-Chinese hands?
Well, first of all, you're addressing Pennsylvania. I try to look at the country. I can find no particular information that shows there's a tremendous amount of Pennsylvania farmland that is particularly owned by China. According to the general national level, China bought Smithfield ham, I don't know, half a dozen years ago or more. More than 50% of the land that China owns in America is because of Smithfield and their farms. So really, China has been, it literally is a farmer. Smithfield, obviously they own it. They're, first of all, I don't know if you realize, but China's not a big beef consumer, they're a big pork consumer. Their luxury meat is pork. They still use a lot of chicken, but their luxury meat is like ours is beef, theirs is pork. So that's why they bought Smithfield. So basically, China owns, according to what I could find, about 380,000 acres, I'm sorry, of land. It's a small amount. Canada owns almost 3 million acres. Netherlands owns almost 5 million acres. A series of other European countries own 2 to 3 million acres. So China's 380,000 is quite small. The biggest complaint has been, and I think this is very concerning and legitimate, some of the land they've been buying is very close to our military bases and air defense and so on. This is where we should be addressing it heavily, is because they should not be allowed within a substantial distance a foreign country to own land near our military bases.
Okay. All right. Shifting gears again a little bit. Another viewer wants to know, are the Russians and are the Chinese violating international treaties and extracting minerals from the Arctic and Antarctic while the U.S. sits on its hands and does nothing? What approach does our national business community want to take in regard to acquiring minerals in these two areas of the world?
Well, first of all, it's a very complicated process because really, as you know, you only control a certain area off your shore, 100 miles or something like that. So really it's the UN, which we know is totally incompetent and corrupt. So basically, that who should be allowed to do what in the oceans, it's really a very loose governmental control. And I couldn't find any major thing to see that these countries are, in fact, mining. I've read articles where there is a tremendous resources because one of the things is meteorites obviously crashed into the ocean. The ocean's 2/3 of our water body, and there's giant boulders down there which are high in very valuable minerals. So basically, is it wrong for us to try to set up a system? But at this point, it would have to go through the UN, and I have not seen any real movement. And this statement that China and Russia are doing it, I have not seen any. I couldn't find anything on that.
Okay.
Very frankly.
One last question before a break, and that is, it seems like all of President Eisenhower's warnings about the military-industrial complex have come true in the Ukrainian war. How can the average person help pull us and our industries out of this war before it becomes a nuclear conflict? This person is obviously quite worried about.
Well, I'm quite worried too, and very frankly, the war in Ukraine has no good solution. For us to not support it, obviously, is very dangerous because Ukraine would probably fail. And at the same time, we know Ukraine is an extremely non-democratic country. It's a dictatorship. And it's a very corrupt country. It's just about as corrupt as Russia is. So very frankly, to assume that a lot of our aid going to Ukraine is not going into the pockets of possibly the Clintons, I mean the Bidens for that matter, who knows. But basically, there is definitely, it's a corrupt country. And the accountability in war is always limited. And the accountability of our aid, which is now over $100 billion, going to Ukraine is frightening, but for us to cut it off is also, the results could be frightening too because Ukraine may collapse.
Okay. All right. In that note, we will be back in just a minute with the second part of the Arnold Report. See you in a minute.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines, and on this week's edition, we are doing an Arnold Report, and our guest is Ed Arnold, the chairman of Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Ed, we have a variety of other questions that have been sent in by our viewers, and these I've consolidated together because they all have to deal with the world of energy. First of all, one of our viewers asks us a question. They want to ask you, does our country have any oil left in the strategic oil reserve, since President Biden has been selling it to China and putting it on the market to keep gas prices lower before elections? Why would we sell oil from the strategic reserve to our primary future adversary in the world?
Obviously, that's an excellent question. The answer is, number one, this has been, for political reasons only, the largest selling out of reserves by far. In fact, it's 2 times more than the total withdrawal of our reserves probably over since it was started in '75. It's 180 million barrels, which before they were always smaller numbers, 30 million, 10 million, and so on. And they were generally for emergencies, hurricanes, wars, major crises that were not politically oriented. Now, there is also the fact that theoretically when we withdraw the oil, you're going to sell to the highest bidder. Well, I guess China was the highest bidder, and I don't know that for sure, but I can assume that. But that's ridiculous. It should have been domestic, period.
Well, it should be based on need, strategic need.
That's right, and it should affect, therefore, which, again, the whole idea, it was a political reason, keep the price of oil down to make the election better. So, therefore, it was absolutely no justification, where all our other withdrawals generally were for sound reasons, and actually 50% of the oil that was withdrawn in the past had to be returned, and it was generally returned within a year. So basically, when there was a crisis, you withdrew the oil. When the crisis passed, you put the oil back in. And those who bought the oil, their responsibility was to return it. So basically, what we're doing now is just typical more of the corruption of the Biden administration.
Okay. The next question regarding energy is from a viewer who wants to ask you, are energy industries one of the most surefire investing opportunities today? Which sector of the energy industry would you recommend? Now, they're not asking you to recommend a specific stock. They're asking you which type of energy would you invest in.
Well, basically, because the Biden administration is going to war with the oil industry, and in the world, and I assume similarly in the United States, 80% of energy comes from carbons, which is coal and oil, or natural gas in that area. Mm-hmm. So basically, to say that we're going to eliminate 80% of our energy source in the next 30 years or so, that actually less than that, they want to do it by 2050, and at the same time, because of electric vehicles and also to all electric things, we're going to need more energy for electricity. So this is absolutely completely ludicrous. It's not possible to happen. It's just going to make us very poor. It's going to make the world very poor. Oil and the carbons have an inexpensive form of energy and have obviously contributed greatly to the prosperity of the world and getting people out of poverty. And this is going to put us right back into poverty.
Okay.
Oh, and therefore, what would you do? In the oil industry, I want to make one other statement. I didn't recommend individual stocks, but I happen to own 2 oil stocks. They're smaller companies. Small in the oil industry is pretty big, but they're small compared to the giants. And they actually give a very healthy dividend. And the dividend, even when the price of oil went down, was still secure. And now, of course, oil is going up. The stocks have gone up, and the dividend continues to be very, very lucrative, double-digit, over 10%. So overall, I consider that if looking at the different kinds of oil companies, mid-size rather than large, you can find that it's a very good, in my opinion, very good return.
Okay. Well, another type of energy is, of course, wind energy. And this viewer wants to ask you, why are offshore wind farms doing so much more poorly than onshore wind farms? And I believe the Wall Street Journal was talking about this not long ago.
Well, basically, I guess it's just simple economics. Obviously, you sell electricity for whatever the price it goes for, and it costs more to build things offshore. It's very simple. Now, the environmental effect, which nobody cares about anymore, whales and dolphins don't matter somehow to our environmentalists anymore. That can kill them, that's okay. But the fact still remains, salt water is very corrosive. I have to have a home at the shore, and I can guarantee you, air conditioners last shorter. Everything lasts a lot shorter at the shore because of salt air. Mm-hmm. So obviously, the maintenance in these offshore mills are going to be a lot higher. Their life cycle is going to be a lot shorter, and so it's just more costly.
Okay. And this is a large question, a multi-part question. And this viewer wants to ask you, as the Biden administration pushes its green agenda, what will the price of electricity eventually be? How much will electricity be increasing in the next few years? Will we have enough electricity if we're shutting down all fossil fuels, tearing down hydroelectric facilities, and not building a new nuclear power base? So that's a
well, obviously we talked about it earlier.
Large
the
question.
Heart and soul of our energy industry is oil and gas, natural gas for power, and also so basically getting back to one point. Atomic energy, because of our concerns, even though these miniature plants look very promising, it will take years and years to get them approved and to be built. They would make a lot of sense, and it's probably actually the best form, but again, politics, environmental concerns about atomic energy are just never going to go away.
And yet the U.S. Navy has been able to use nuclear power plants very effectively, as in all the new ships and submarines are all nuclear powered.
Well, we know that the Nautilus was 35, 40 years ago probably or more. So we know that, but that point is we're back to energy as far as oil and gas.
We say the Navy can do it, but the civilians can't be trusted.
It's too unsafe. You can be in a nuclear sub. So basically speaking, right now, your concern is a very logical one. At the same time, the government talks from both sides of their mouth. You try to do research on dams specifically, which
hydroelectric facilities.
Hydroelectric facilities, and there are 2,200 in the United States. There are actually around 90,000 registered dams, but only 2,200 deliver hydro. That seems to be consistent in all the places I could find it. However, there's been a constant war to tear them down, which is pretty stupid. Well, actually, that war is starting to have results. On the Snake River, which I literally just came back from the Snake River, had a very great trip going up.
Snake River in northwestern America.
Actually, it starts in Yellowstone, ends at the Columbia in Washington State. Obviously, it goes through Montana, goes through Idaho, goes through the border of Oregon and Idaho, and then finally goes into the state of Washington. Well, in the state of Washington, there are 4 dams. There's more others, obviously, on the Snake River, which they're going to tear down. They have decided that to reauthorize them, they must put in fish ladders. Now, they haven't had fish ladders for 50 years, but now we have to have fish ladders. And so, therefore, the utility companies, with other pressures too, have decided they're going to tear the dams down because the cost to refurbish them plus put in the fish ladders is not economically practical. And they claim they can get other energy, which I assume has to be windmills.
It would seem to me, as being a layman on this subject, that fish ladders and fish elevators would not be that expensive, and you wouldn't tear down.
But if you've got a dam that's already in existence, to build a brand new one in the Columbia River, they have beautiful fish ladders, but they built the fish ladders when they built the dams.
Right.
These are older dams. They weren't putting in fish ladders, and now you've got narrow canyons, which is where you try to put a dam. Well, then to put a fish ladder is pretty hard, evidently. The economics supposedly is not there. So here's one case. At the same time, our government, in a different article, states that our goal is to increase the number of power coming from hydro by 50% over the next 20, 30 years. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You want to tear the dams down, but you're going to increase the hydro. The 2 and 2, but of course in the government, 2 and 2 never equals 4. They claim, actually in 2022, that we did increase our hydroelectricity by 2%. Now, as a percentage of our total electricity, of course, it's shrinking, but they're claiming right now around 6.2 to 6.5% of our electricity comes from hydro. And that basically, as I say, their goal is to increase that, or at least increase it as we increase our electricity, and get rid of course, your carbon power plants, which are the majority. So basically what we're back to here is that this whole subject of alternative energy, which really I'm sort of turning into, is that this, as in the dams, 2 and 2 aren't equaling 4, our whole thing of where are we going to get all this energy, it takes a tremendous amount of resources to build windmills specifically. And obviously you can't, and of course we know solar only operates 50% of the time. So you automatically have to have a secondary source in the case of solar, which happens to be batteries. Well, in fact, there's no new battery technology. Batteries are improving. We're doing them a little bit better. We got them a little less expensive. But the raw material costs are going to soar because, again, minerals come from mines. The developed world will not develop any mines. Biden, finally, after many, many years in Minnesota, they finally got the approval to build a major mine, passed all the environmental criteria, and Biden said, no, I do not believe in mines, and we're not going to have it in the United States. So basically, we're talking about extreme increase in cost in the major materials that make the batteries. And, of course, we have to import them from foreign countries that are not our friends, and many times.
And China has been on a crusade for many years to try to monopolize many of these minerals. Is that
That's
not
correct.
true?
But China also and India are building coal mines like mad. We only have, I think, 22 or 23 left. Coal power plants. They're going to build more in a year than we have. Mm-hmm. And so is India. So therefore, they are not buying into this. They're saying, yeah, down the road we'll do it. Well, over 60% of the world's quote-unquote CO2 pollution comes out of China and India. So if they're going to continue to increase, the rest of the world can go to zero and it won't mean anything. So the whole math of it is crazy, but also your idea of cost. There's no question hydro is the least expensive method of producing energy. And it's environmentally the soundest. Yet we want to attack that and go into things that are, very frankly, less environmentally friendly because the life cycle, as I understand it, of the blades on a windmill are for some reason not recyclable. They're some exotic material, and their lifespan seems to be a little questionable how long they last. Because first of all, what you have in most electric things is there's a slow deterioration. So it's not a matter that they wouldn't continue to function, but they wouldn't function as efficient. So you wouldn't want them. Of course, the other thing we don't want to talk about, which I just came back again from my trip out west, where they have this environmental thing trying to protect the birds, in this case falcons and raptors and so on. Well, we're killing millions of birds and bats with our windmills, and if we actually produced a substantial amount of energy, like 30, 40, 50% from windmills, we would probably wipe our bird population out. Somehow that's okay now. We lost one for the forest in Oregon, but God forbid should we wipe out a whole group. And especially wiping out your birds along the seacoast, build them in the ocean. And right now the projection is that we want to build windmills from Maine down to Florida.
Well, this certainly is, our viewers have certainly challenged you, particularly in the area of energy, and that we obviously need to do more work there, a lot more thinking, and our public officials need a lot more, perhaps, input from all of us.
Well, I think we need to have another program that would just go on that and do a lot more research because it's very challenging.
So you are getting a preview of a future Arnold report. And we want to thank you for tuning in today, and we will look for you next week. Thanks again, Mr. Arnold. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.